My mother-in-law grabbed my 7-year-old daughter's hand at the Thanksgiving table and moved her to a folding chair in the hallway. "That seat is for family." She said it the way you'd read a grocery list. My daughter looked at me from the doorway with those big brown eyes and didn't make a sound. 14 people at that table. Not one of them said a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my phone and typed 2 sentences to my attorney. 3 weeks later, my mother-in-law received a certified letter that made her hands shake so badly she had to sit down on the front porch steps to read it. "My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, a licensed occupational therapist, and a mother. And this is the story of how I stopped shrinking myself to fit inside a family that was never going to make room for my daughter anyway." If you're new here, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the morning everything finally broke open. Most mornings in our rental house on Sycamore Drive started the same way. 6 in the morning, the coffee maker sputtering, Maya already awake and cross-legged on the kitchen floor with her sketchbook, drawing whatever she'd dreamed about. She was 7 that fall, small for her age. With dark curly hair, she refused to let me brush without negotiating, and a laugh that came out of nowhere and took over the whole room. She'd been with me since she was 18 months old. I finalized the adoption the week before her 3rd birthday, standing in a county courthouse in a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, holding her hand while she wore a tutu she'd insisted on, and waved at the judge like she already knew the outcome was going to be good. She had a stuffed elephant named Gerald. She slept with him every night, one arm hooked around his trunk. She asked hard questions at bedtime, the kind that made me set my phone face down and really think. Things like, why do some kids not have moms? And is love something you learn or something you just have? Every few weeks, without warning, she'd look up from whatever she was doing and ask me the same question. "Am I your real daughter? Like, for real, real?" Every time, same answer. "Yes, baby. For real, real. Forever." I had been paying my former mother-in-law, Diane, $800 a month to rent the house on Sycamore Drive. The house belonged to her, she said. She and my ex-husband, Derek, had agreed after our divorce that I could stay there for stability, for Maya's sake, while I got back on my feet financially. Diane collected the payment by personal check, first of every month, no exceptions. I had 67 canceled checks photographed and saved in a folder on my Google Drive. Every single one. I'm an occupational therapist. We document. It's how we're wired. We observe, we record, we track patterns over time. Diane told me a lease wasn't necessary. "We're practically still family," she said. "We don't need paperwork between us." I believed her for 3 years. Remember that number. 67 checks. It's going to matter later. Thanksgiving at the Alderman house was not a gathering. It was a performance, produced and directed by Diane Alderman, who had managed the PTA at Westfield Elementary for 11 years and never fully retired from the job of telling other people where to stand. The long farmhouse table seated 16. Good china, cloth napkins. A seating arrangement that was never written down but was absolute and permanent. Diane at the head, nearest the kitchen. Her son Derek, my ex-husband, to her right. Derek's new girlfriend, Stephanie, beside him. Stephanie's daughter from her first marriage, a 5-year-old named Piper, was given the seat right next to Diane, close enough that Diane could pour her apple juice and call her sweetheart and fix the bow in her hair between courses. Piper had been in the family 4 months. Maya had been in my life for 6 years. Maya and I sat at the far end of the table near the window where the draft came through every time someone opened the back door. Not an accident. Nothing Diane did was accidental. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Diane called. Not to ask what Maya wanted on her plate. Not to ask whether she still had that dairy sensitivity she'd had the year before. She called to tell me not to let Maya wear anything with ruffles, because Piper was wearing a dress with ruffles, and Stephanie had spent a lot of money on it, and Diane didn't want any awkwardness. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm and said, "Sure, okay." That night I found Maya a plain navy dress. She tried it on and stood on the bathroom step stool and looked at herself very seriously and said, "Mommy, can I sit next to Diane this year? Piper always gets to sit next to her and I want to try." I told her I'd see what I could do. I should have known right then. The seating chart wasn't about logistics, it was about rank. And in Diane's house, my daughter had never been ranked at all. Thanksgiving. 4:45 in the afternoon. The sky was doing that gray-purple thing it does in November in Ohio, flat and close, the kind of sky that makes the inside of every house feel smaller. Maya had spent the drive over holding a construction paper card she'd made for Diane. On the front, she'd drawn a turkey made of her handprint and written in her careful 7-year-old printing, "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma Diane, love Maya." She'd been working on it since Monday. She walked into the Alderman house holding that card in front of her with both hands. Diane met us at the door. She looked at Maya, touched the top of her head once, the way you'd pat a dog you weren't sure of, and moved on. No hug. No "oh, I love your dress." Then Piper came racing down the hallway in her ruffled dress, and Diane crouched down with her arms open and her whole face transformed, lit up from the inside, and she held that little girl and rocked her and said, "There she is, my Thanksgiving girl. Oh, I missed you so much." Maya stood 2 feet away, holding her handprint turkey, and watched. Inside, the table was set. I scanned for Maya's name, not at the main table. Against the wall near the hallway, someone had unfolded one of those plastic card tables, the kind that wobbles if you lean on it, and set it with a single paper plate and a plastic fork and a paper napkin with little turkeys printed on it. 1 chair. Piper, who was 5 and had been around for 4 months, sat at the main table with the adults. Maya, who was 7 and had known this family her entire remembered life, was in the hallway. I pulled Diane aside in the kitchen, my voice low. "She needs to be at the table, Diane. She's 7 years old, there's space." Diane didn't look at me when she answered. She was arranging a bread basket. "Let's not make tonight complicated, Claire. She'll be fine out there. She has her own little space." Her own little space. I repeated it in my head all the way back to the hallway where Maya was already sitting at her wobbling card table, feet dangling because the chair was too tall, carefully unfolding her paper napkin and placing it on her lap like she was at a restaurant, and the service was going to be excellent. I have thought about that image every single day since. The meal was halfway done when Maya walked in. I'd been watching her through the doorway. She'd eaten her turkey quietly. She'd kept her card on her lap the whole time, waiting for the right moment. Then something shifted in her face. A small decision made behind those dark eyes, and she stood up and carried her card into the dining room and stood at the corner of the main table. "I made this for you, Grandma Diane," she said. "Happy Thanksgiving." Diane set down her fork. The table did not go quiet the way a room does when something joyful happens. It went quiet the way a room does when something uncomfortable is about to be handled. Diane looked at the card. Then she set it beside her water glass without opening it and said, in her board meeting voice, "That's very sweet, Maya. Why don't you go finish your dinner?" Maya stood there another second. Just 1 second. And in that second, her face went through something I am not able to fully describe. A closing. Like a door shutting very softly, in a house where everyone is asleep, and no one hears it. She turned to go back to the hallway. And then Diane picked the card up off the table and placed it on the sideboard, behind the serving dishes, out of sight, without looking at it again. I set my napkin on my plate. "I want you to understand something about what happened next." I had spent 3 years measuring every reaction. 3 years of swallowing the thing I wanted to say because I was living in Diane's rental house, because Derek and I shared custody and I didn't want conflict, because I kept telling myself that any connection was better than no connection, that Maya needed extended family, even if that family didn't quite know how to love her yet. 3 years. And then I watched Diane slide my daughter's handmade card behind a gravy boat like it was a piece of junk mail. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I have 4 years of experience working with children in crisis, and I know exactly what raised voices do to small bodies. My voice dropped instead of rising, the way it does when I'm most serious, and I said, "Maya, get your coat." Diane looked up. "Claire, don't be dramatic. Get your coat, bug." I walked to the sideboard and picked up Maya's card. I took her hand in the hallway, and we got our coats from the closet by the front door, and I opened that door, and we walked out into the November air, and I didn't look back. Maya asked, in the parking lot, her breath making little clouds. Did I do something wrong? No, I said. You did everything right. She nodded slowly, thinking about that. Then she took my hand and we walked to the car. I buckled her into the back seat, and I sat in the driver's seat, and I did not start the engine for 4 full minutes. I sat and I breathed, and I did what I always do when the worst thing in the room just happened. I got very quiet and very still, and I started making a plan. By 8 o'clock that night, my phone had become a weapon. Someone was pointing at me. Derek, you embarrassed Diane in front of everyone. You always have to make a scene. Stephanie. Piper was really upset by the tension you created. She's been crying. Diane. In a 3-paragraph text. I have tried for 3 years to include Maya, and this is the thanks I receive. What I did was completely misunderstood. The card table was not meant as an insult. I simply thought the children would enjoy having their own space. 14 people. Not one of them had said anything to Diane during dinner. Not one of them texted me to ask whether Maya was okay. I put the phone face down on the counter and ran Maya a bath. She was in there a long time. I sat on the edge of the tub and read her 2 chapters of her book, and she didn't ask about Thanksgiving, and I didn't bring it up. She let me wash her hair without negotiating. She was very quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't peace but is a child processing something the size of her body. At bedtime, she said, looking at the ceiling, Grandma Diane doesn't really love me, does she? It wasn't a question. I smoothed her hair off her forehead. Some people don't know how to love someone they don't understand yet. That's about them, not you. She thought about it. Does it get better? We're going to make it better. That's my job. She fell asleep with Gerald tucked under her chin. I went to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I created a document titled Family Incident Log. I sat there until 12:30 in the morning, writing down everything I could remember from the last 3 years. The birthday party where Maya wasn't included in the grandchildren's gift table. The Christmas where Piper received an engraved ornament with her name on it, and Maya received a gift card with no personal note. The time Diane said at Easter, right in front of Maya. Of course it's different, she came to us later. The time, the year before, when the family photographer at a reunion had arranged everyone for the photo and Diane had physically repositioned Maya to the outside edge, 1 step removed. Dates. Witnesses. Quotes. 3 years of small cruelties. The kind you can talk yourself out of noticing one at a time, but which, assembled together on a screen at midnight, tell a very clear story. I did not reply to a single message that night. I just documented. Nurses document. And apparently, so do occupational therapists who are finally done being patient. The next morning, Derek came to the house. Not a phone call first. Just his car in the driveway at 9 a.m. And then his knock. The confident knock of someone who still thinks of himself as having the right to knock at that particular door. I opened it. He looked past me into the house, the way he'd always done, as if he was checking the inventory. We need to talk about last night. Okay. You embarrassed my mother in front of her whole family. Your mother put our 7-year-old daughter in a hallway and hid the card she made in a turkey handprint behind a gravy boat. She was trying to give the kids their own space. Derek, I have it on my phone. Stephanie was taking videos at the table all night and sending them to a group chat. I'm in that group chat. I can see exactly what happened and exactly how much space Maya was given. He went very still. I hadn't planned to say that, but it was true. Stephanie's videos, time-stamped, sent to a family group chat that no one had thought to remove me from after the divorce. 14 minutes of footage. The adult table. The laughter. The way Diane cut Piper's turkey into small pieces and told her she was the prettiest girl at the party. And in the background of one video, just visible through the doorway, Maya at her card table, eating alone. I'm going to need you to step back from the door now, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through his face that I couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Derek rarely felt guilt. Something more like recalculation. He left. I opened my voice memos and hit stop. I'd been recording since he knocked. Then, for the first time, I let myself ask the question I'd been pushing away for 3 years. Whose house was I actually living in? I need to back up, because Thanksgiving wasn't the beginning. It was just the day Diane stopped being careful. When Derek and I divorced, I had a 2-bedroom rental in a part of town I couldn't really afford on a single therapist's salary, a 6-year-old who needed stability, and a mother-in-law who offered me the house on Sycamore Drive for $800 a month, below market, she pointed out. As a kindness. What she didn't say, but what I understood, was that the kindness came with terms. Terms that were never written down. Be available. Be agreeable. Don't make things complicated. Show up at family events and smile and let Maya call Diane grandma and don't notice when Diane loves some grandchildren more than others. 3 years. 67 checks. The day after Derek's visit, I called my Aunt Rosemary. Aunt Rosemary was 64 years old and had spent 30 years as a paralegal in a family law firm in Columbus before she retired. She was the person I called when I needed to understand something legal without paying $400 an hour to understand it. I told her everything. All of it. The card table, the card, the video footage, the 3-year incident log, the recording. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, who owns the house you're living in?" I said, "Diane." "She inherited it from Derek's grandmother." "And you've seen the deed?" I had not seen the deed. "Pull the county property records," Rosemary said. "It takes 5 minutes online. Pull them today." I pulled them that afternoon on my lunch break. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and searched the county auditor's website for the property at 14 Sycamore Drive. The owner of record was not Diane Alderman. It was Margaret Alderman, Derek's grandmother, who had died 2 years ago. I sat in my car with the heat running and the auditor's page open on my phone for a very long time. No deed transfer. No probate filing recorded for that property, which meant either the estate hadn't been settled, or it had been settled in a way that hadn't made it into the county records, or Diane had simply been telling everyone the house was hers for so long that no one had thought to check. I called Rosemary back. She said, "Get yourself a real estate attorney." Today, his name was Paul Nguyen. Rosemary had worked with him years ago and trusted him. He was methodical, unhurried, the kind of attorney who made you feel like he had already considered every possible scenario and was mildly interested to see which one materialized. I met him at his office 2 days after Thanksgiving with my 67 bank statements, my incident log, my phone screenshots, and the 14-minute video from Stephanie's group chat. He reviewed the county records himself. Then he made some calls. Then he sat back in his chair and said, in the same tone you'd use to deliver a weather forecast, "There's no recorded deed transfer from the Margaret Alderman estate to Diane Alderman. There's an open probate case that's been sitting dormant for 19 months. And the primary heir under Margaret's will, based on the filing, is not Diane." I waited. The house was left to Derek, her grandson, not to Diane. The room tilted the way it does when your brain can't immediately process what your ears just heard. Diane had been collecting rent from me for 3 years, on a house that legally belonged to her son, my ex-husband, the man she'd called to complain about me the morning after Thanksgiving, the man who had never once mentioned, in 3 years of co-parenting conversations, that his grandmother's house was actually his. Either Derek didn't know, or Derek had let it happen. Paul said, "I can find out which." He called Derek's attorney the next afternoon. Derek, it turned out, did know. He had known for 19 months. He and Diane had an informal arrangement. She managed the property, collected the rent, kept whatever she made. He'd never filed the deed transfer because filing it would require paying the estate taxes, and neither of them had gotten around to it. $800 a month for 36 months. $28,800. Paid to a woman who had no legal standing to collect it, on a house that belonged to my ex-husband, who shared custody of my daughter. Paul set his pen down. "This is a significant problem for them," he said, "and a significant opportunity for you. I want to be honest about something. When I understood what had happened, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The particular exhaustion of someone who has spent years making herself smaller, paying a toll to cross a bridge she didn't know she was even allowed to question. But underneath the tired, something else. a door I hadn't seen until it swung open. While Paul began pulling together the formal paperwork, I went home and made 3 decisions. The first decision: I was done protecting everyone else's comfort at Maya's expense. The second decision: I was going to document everything going forward the way I'd always documented everything, but this time, I was going to use it. The third decision: I was going to call Dr. Fiona Marsh. Dr. Marsh was a child psychologist in Worthington who specialized in adopted children and attachment. I'd been meaning to call her office for 2 years, telling myself Maya was fine, she was resilient, she was okay. Sitting in my kitchen that night, thinking about my daughter's face when Diane set her card behind the gravy boat, I understood that fine and okay were not the same as whole. I made the appointment for the following Tuesday. Meanwhile, Paul sent a letter. Not a text, not an email. A formal letter, on firm letterhead, delivered by certified mail to Diane Alderman and to Derek Alderman separately. The letter outlined the property situation clearly and without drama. The estate had not been properly settled, the deed had not been transferred, rent had been collected without legal authority. The letter requested a full accounting of all payments received and notice of intent to resolve the estate properly, including the formal transfer of the property title within 30 days. Derek received his letter on a Monday. He called me 11 minutes later. His voice was not the recalculating voice from the doorway. It was something raw, something I hadn't heard from him in years. "What is this? What are you doing? This is insane. It's a letter from my attorney. His number is on the letterhead. You can't do this. That house is my mother has. Derek, the deed is in your name. That's a fact. It's in the county records. If you have questions about the legal situation, you should talk to Paul." I hung up. Diane called 20 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She left 4 minutes of crying and accusations, the word manipulative used 7 times, and a closing line about how she had sacrificed everything for that family, and this was how she was repaid. I saved it, filed it, didn't respond. What happened next came from a direction I hadn't expected. Derek's grandmother, Margaret, had a sister. Her name was Ruth Bellamy. She was 77 years old, sharp as a letter opener, and had spent her retirement in a condo in Clearwater, Florida, growing tomatoes on her balcony, and keeping track of everything the way women of her generation kept track of everything, quietly and completely. Ruth had not been told about the probate. She had not been told that the house on Sycamore Drive was sitting in limbo. She had not been told that someone had been collecting rent on an asset that was part of an unsettled estate. She heard about it through a cousin who heard about it through Aunt Rosemary. Ruth called me on a Wednesday evening. I was at the kitchen table helping Maya with a worksheet on fractions. "Claire," she said, "tell me what's happening." I told her. All of it. The table, the card, the video, the payments, the dormant probate, the letter. She listened without interrupting, which is the most underrated form of respect I know. When I finished, she said, "My sister loved that child of yours. She told me Maya had the most beautiful laugh of any little one she'd ever met. She said it to me twice. I hadn't known that. Margaret had died before I'd really understood what her presence in Maya's life had meant." "Margaret's estate should have been handled 19 months ago," Ruth said. "I'm calling an attorney in the morning." She did. Her attorney, a probate specialist in Columbus named Janet Hewitt, moved quickly. Within 10 days, Ruth had formally requested that the probate court appoint an independent administrator to finalize Margaret's estate, citing the dormant filing and new information about property management issues. The court agreed. Paul updated me on a Thursday afternoon. His voice had the quality of a man reading very good news from a document he's pleased to have been associated with. The independent administrator had reviewed the estate. The house on Sycamore Drive was being formally transferred into Derek's name per Margaret's will. Derek was now required to either formalize my rental arrangement with a proper lease at fair market rate or provide notice to vacate. Either way, he was on record. Additionally, the administrator had flagged the rent collection issue to the probate court for review. Diane had collected payments on estate property without authority. That was a problem that belonged to Diane and to Derek and to their attorneys. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means, Paul said, that you have leverage you didn't have a month ago. And more importantly, you have a record. I asked him one more thing that afternoon. I'd been carrying it since Thanksgiving, and I needed to say it out loud to someone who could tell me whether I was within my rights. Can I file a report? About what happened to Maya at Thanksgiving? Paul was quiet for a moment. What specifically happened? Her grandmother excluded her deliberately from the family table on a holiday, placed her alone in a hallway, dismissed the card she made her in front of 14 people, and this has been a pattern for 3 years. I have documentation. Exclusion and emotional dismissal within a family setting is genuinely difficult to address through formal channels, Paul said carefully. However, if you're concerned about the pattern of treatment and its effect on Maya's well-being, there are 2 things you can do. You can raise it in the context of your custody arrangement, and you can work with Maya's therapist to document the observed effects on her. Both create a record. That's what I'll do, I said. The Tuesday appointment with Dr. Marsh arrived. Maya went in wearing her favorite striped sweater and her sneakers with the light-up soles she'd had since the summer, and refused to give up even though they were half a size too small. She walked into Dr. Tame, this is Mama N72, Marsh's office with Gerald tucked under her arm, and did not look scared, which made me more scared than if she had. 40 minutes later, Dr. Marsh came out and asked Maya to pick a sticker from the basket by the door, then walked me to the hallway. She was a tall woman who spoke precisely, each sentence finished before she started the next. Maya shared some things today that I want you to hear. I nodded. She described a pattern she called being invisible. She said that at certain family gatherings she feels like she is standing behind glass, able to see everyone, but unable to be seen herself. She used that exact phrase, behind glass. I pressed my back against the wall of that hallway and breathed. She also said something, I want to be careful about how I relay. Dr. Marsh looked at me steadily. She said she sometimes wonders if she's lovable, not whether she is loved, whether she is lovable. That's a distinction I want you to hear, because it tells us something about what she's internalized. I thought about every morning Maya had asked me, am I your real daughter? For real real? I had always answered yes. I had always meant it. And somehow, somewhere in the distance between my yes and the world she moved through, she had started to wonder whether she was the kind of person who deserved to be loved. 3 years. While I was being agreeable and keeping the peace and paying $800 a month to belong to a family that was teaching my daughter, she didn't. She is resilient, Dr. Marsh said. Deeply so. And she needs the adults around her to show her through action, consistently, that she belongs. She will have that, I said. Dr. Marsh nodded. I'd like to see her weekly for now. On the drive home, Maya was quiet for a while, watching the bare trees go by, and then she said without looking at me, Dr. Marsh says feelings are like weather, they come and they go, and none of them are forever. That's true. Even the bad ones? Especially the bad ones. She considered that. Then she said, I'm kind of mad at Grandma Diane. That's a completely reasonable thing to be. She nodded slowly and went back to watching the trees. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was making a decision. The last one in a series of decisions I should have started making years ago. I was done managing the situation. I was going to resolve it. Paul filed a formal demand with Derek's attorney the following week. The demand had 3 components. First, a proper lease for the property on Sycamore Drive, at current fair market rate, with all tenant protections properly documented. Second, reimbursement of overpayments made during the period when rent was collected without legal authority, calculated at a modest but documented figure. Third, a formal parenting plan modification request citing the documented pattern of differential treatment of Maya at Alderman family events, supported by Dr. Marsh's clinical observations, the incident log, and the video footage. Derek's attorney called Paul within 48 hours. He was, Paul told me later, with the measured satisfaction of a man who does not often allow himself visible satisfaction, extremely motivated to settle. The thing about men like Derek is that the image matters more than the reality. An eviction on record. A probate court review of his mother's unauthorized rent collection. A custody modification hearing at which 14 minutes of video footage would be entered as evidence. None of that fit the image, not even a little. They settled within 3 weeks. I won't detail every term, but I will tell you that Maya's name appeared in the formal parenting plan modification for the first time. In writing, with specific language about equitable treatment at family gatherings, documented by both parties. Diane had retained her own attorney, briefly. He advised her to stay quiet. She did not stay quiet. She sent a group message to 14 family members, explaining that I was vindictive and unstable, and had manipulated Derek and the courts, and that she only ever tried to love Maya the best she could. I know because 4 of those 14 family members forwarded it to me. One of them was Derek's cousin Jenna, who had sat at that Thanksgiving table, who had watched Maya carry her handprint turkey to Diane and watched Diane put it behind the gravy boat, and who sent me the message with one line attached. I should have said something that night. I'm sorry I didn't. 2 words. 2 words and something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't post anything. I didn't respond to the group message. I sent Paul the screenshots and moved on. The probate review of Diane's rent collection resulted in a formal finding that she had acted outside her authority. Diane was required to reconcile the payments with Derek's estate accounting. That problem belonged to the 2 of them now. Ruth Bellamy, from her balcony in Clearwater, sent Maya a card. Inside was a photograph of Margaret holding Maya at a birthday party 3 years ago. Maya's face turned up laughing at something off camera. Margaret looking at her with the exact expression that tells you everything about how someone feels about another person. On the back of the photograph, in Ruth's handwriting, she called you her sunshine girl. I thought you should know. Maya held that photo for a long time. Then she went to her room and pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. January. Things settle into their new shape the way water finds its level. Derek and I had our first co-parenting session in 18 months that did not end in a door being closed harder than necessary. It was not warm. It was not resolved. But it was functional in a way that it hadn't been before, because there was a document now, with both our names on it, and documents have a clarifying effect on people who'd prefer things to remain undefined. Diane requested to send Maya a birthday card for Maya's upcoming birthday in February. Through Paul, I approved written communication only. No direct contact, no family event attendance without 30 days' notice, and my written agreement. She sent a card. Inside, she wrote 3 lines. She said she was sorry Maya had felt excluded. She said she hoped Maya was well. She said she hoped someday they could start again. She did not say she had been wrong. She did not say what she had done. She said Maya had felt excluded, which is different from saying Diane had excluded her, and I want to be precise about that distinction because it matters. Feeling something is not the same as something being done to you. I read the card twice, then I put it in a drawer. Not yet, maybe not ever. That's a decision Maya can make when she's old enough to make it herself. One evening in February, a Tuesday, warmer than it had any right to be for February in Ohio, I was at the stove, making the pasta with the little bow ties that Maya liked, the ones she said looked like butterflies, and she came sliding into the kitchen in her socks and wrapped her arms around me from behind the way she did, pressing her face between my shoulder blades. Mommy. Hey, Bug. She was quiet for a moment. I kept stirring. Then she said, Am I your real daughter? Like, for real? The question she'd been asking me since she was 3. The one I'd answered 100 times on autopilot, the quick, reassuring reflex. I turned the burner to low. I set the spoon on the rest. I turned around and crouched down so we were eye to eye, her hands in mine, and I gave her a different answer than I'd ever given before. You are my real daughter. And this house is our real home. And I am done letting anyone make you feel like you have to prove it, to them or to yourself. You belong because you are mine, and I am yours. That's not something anyone gets to debate. She looked at me for a moment, very seriously, the way she looked at hard math problems, making sure she'd understood correctly. Then she smiled. Not the careful smile she used in certain rooms, the one that was always asking permission. A real one, unhesitating, full. I hadn't seen that smile in months. Later, After she was asleep, I walked past her room. The door was open a crack. The nightlight was on. Gerald was tucked against her side. On the corkboard above her desk, next to the photo from Ruth, she'd pinned the construction paper turkey card she'd made for Thanksgiving, the one Diane had slid behind the gravy boat. She'd gotten it back when we left that night, carried it to the car, and apparently saved it. Above it she'd written in her best handwriting, in purple marker, "I made this, and it is good." 7 years old, and she already understood something it had taken me 3 years to learn. You don't prove your worth to people who've already decided not to see it. You just keep making the turkey, and knowing it's good, and carrying it out the door with you when you go. I leaned against the doorframe, and listened to my daughter breathe in a room that was ours, in a life we were building together, one that didn't require anyone's permission to be real. Family isn't the people who gave you a seat at their table. It's the people who never once made you wonder whether you deserved one. That's our story, mine and Maya's. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your child safe, I hope this gave you something. Hit subscribe if you're new, leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.